So, you know what upsets me? How everyone acts like Cape Verde even making it to the World Cup was some impossible miracle, like no one could have seen it coming, when they had pretty much already qualified all the way back in 2014, had FIFA not banned them at the last minute. They were inches away when FIFA sent their whole project crashing down, but instead of cowering away, these guys picked up the pieces and spent the next 12 years on a mission to take revenge on them, building a super team out of a band of misfits other nations refused to take a second look at. You think Vozinha's story is wild? You think calling a player up to the World Cup via LinkedIn is absurd? They literally have a player who used to be a mailman, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Listen, back in 2008, Cape Verde found themselves without a manager and no money to hire one only a month before the World Cup qualifiers started. So they did what they had to do. They got the team's fitness coach to take over the whole squad, but on one condition: they could pick his assistant manager, because in reality there was another man the federation wanted for the job, Bubista, their current manager. All the way back then they already knew he was the only one who could save them. You see, Cape Verde had never stood a chance, having been made into the central hub of the Atlantic slave trade after the Portuguese stumbled onto the islands completely uninhabited. When slavery was abolished, they became a forgotten colony. However, even once they set themselves free, things weren't easy. There was a reason the islands were uninhabited. People were left to fend for themselves on dry land under a climate so brutal that most of the islands could barely grow crops. There were droughts, famines, and soon, anyone who could leave had left. As you can imagine, there was not much time to think about football. If the day they gained their independence, they instantly headed to their national stadium to replace the Portuguese flag with their own, it still took them 11 years before they were even able to join FIFA, another 8 before they played their first ever qualifier for the African Cup of Nations. But already then, Bubista was one of those players. In fact, he was their captain. Regardless of the chaos, for 16 years straight, Bubista was the one player holding that team together. As he said it himself, we didn't even have proper kits to wear. And by the turn of the millennium, even if Cape Verde were playing their first World Cup qualifiers, they were ranked 182nd in the world. They weren't even close to having a shot. And without much changing, by the time he had retired, he just couldn't let go. Almost immediately, he had joined their staff, and once he became the assistant to their fitness coach turned manager, they started a revolution. Their plan was simple. Remember when I said that those who could had left Cape Verde already? Well, now there were twice as many Cape Verdeans spread across the globe than there were living in the islands. Nani, Nuno Mendes, Patrick Vieira, Henrik Larsson, even Cristiano Ronaldo through his great-grandmother, all eligible to play for Cape Verde. It was only a matter of convincing them to join. But yeah, with their national stadium consisting of an artificial turf and 8,000 seats, it wasn't easy. However, all they needed was to get the ball rolling, and by 2010, as they held Portugal to a draw, with 5 players on their starting 11 having been raised precisely in Portugal, they had proof it was working. And then, just as they were looking everywhere else, they hit the jackpot. The first born and raised Cape Verdean wonder kid. Signed at only 18 to Le Havre's academy, alongside the likes of Pogba and Mendy, Ryan Mensch hit the ground running with such speed that the day super scout Steve Walsh first found Riyad Mahrez, he was actually there to watch Ryan. Fast forward a couple more years and he was being signed by Lille to replace none other than Eden Hazard, all precisely as Cape Verde made it to their first ever AFCON playoff against the Cameroon of Samuel Eto'o. But if you want to talk about timing, there was something far more impressive than that, because that day their first choice goalkeeper got injured, meaning they would have to give a rookie keeper his debut on the biggest match in their history. However, that keeper was Vozinha. Yeah, suffice to say, they won. Even more impressively, on their very first tournament, they made it all the way to the quarterfinals, but their luck flipped almost immediately. Listen, a couple months before the tournament, Ryan Mendes had severely injured his ankle, so much so that he barely made it back in time for it, and maybe that was a sign he shouldn't have played at all, because that quarterfinal was his last football match for 7 months. And a full year and a surgery later, things were so bad, he had to publicly address rumors that he'd be retiring at just 24 years of age. Not to mention that, in the meantime, with Cape Verde having to play the World Cup qualifiers without him, the worst thing that could have happened. Cape Verde beat Tunisia on the final match day to seal a place in the playoffs, and it was the greatest footballing achievement in their history, at least until FIFA arrived. You see, 3 months before, Equatorial Guinea had been forced to forfeit their win against Cape Verde, handing them the 3 points on the account that one of their players had formerly represented Spain and never switched his allegiance since, after all, he was not even eligible to. But the thing is, in that game, Fernando Varela had been handed a red card and a 4-match ban, so the Cape Verdeans argued that with the match being void, his ban should have been reverted, so they proceeded to play him in that decisive match. Only for FIFA to come back and declare it void as well, sending Tunisia to the playoffs in their place. Meaning, out of nowhere, Cape Verde were ranked 27th in the world, but not in the World Cup, and by the following year, they'd actually managed to become the #1 ranked African team on the planet, beating Portugal 2-0 and going undefeated in the group stage of the AFCON despite having to play one of their matches in the middle of a tropical storm. Yet, they still didn't make the knockout stage. And with Boubista having stepped away in order to get some proper club-level experience, once they missed out on the next World Cup, getting demolished 4-0 by the likes of Burkina Faso in the qualifiers, things started getting out of hand. Suddenly, with or without him, their scouting project was sent into overdrive. They found Jamiro Monteiro, born and raised in the Netherlands, playing in the 2nd tier under a certain rookie manager named Arne Slot. They found Nuno da Costa, a former Sporting Academy graduate now playing amateur football at 24 years old in the French 5th division, and somehow snapped him up right as he was about to blow up, earning a move to the Premier League less than 4 years later. But, without a shadow of a doubt, if there is one finding that shows how desperate they were at that point, it's Pico Lopes. You've probably heard about this one. During another late-night search for any player with the slightest bit of Cape Verdean blood, their manager Rui Aguas found the LinkedIn profile of the Shamrock Rovers central defender and sent him a message asking if he'd like to join his national team. The only problem was that Pico, being born and raised in Dublin, did not speak a word of Portuguese, so much so that once he finally checked his inbox and saw the message, he completely ignored it, thinking it was spam, and had the manager not insisted enough that 9 months later he finally copied the message onto Google Translate, Pico would have never played for Cape Verde. However, I'm sorry to say that, even with him on board, Cape Verde still failed to qualify to the next AFCON, so there was only one solution. It was time to convince Boubista to fulfill his destiny, to take over the national team for good, and as his first order of command, he had one rule. Creole was now the only language the players were allowed to speak. Even if you didn't know the language, you had to learn it. It was the easiest way of making sure these players never forgot what they were really playing for. And I guess it must have worked, because even with the pandemic making their lives harder, not only did they make history by beating the Brazilian Olympic team, but they instantly made it back to the AFCON that very same year, managing to reach the knockout stages even after half the squad got food poisoning at not one, but 2 different hotels. Still, it didn't take long before they got a reminder that their project was far from finished, as only a few months later, once Cape Verde found themselves only a win away from finally making it back to the World Cup playoffs after 8 years, their defender Stephen Forge proceeded to give Nigeria a goal in the very first minute of the match, after which, despite their efforts, they could only get a draw. However, I doubt there would have been any tears that day if only they knew that game would be the start of a golden era, as in preparation for the next AFCON, Boubista brought in maybe the best batch of new players the country had ever seen. So, to start things off, he finally convinced Jovan Cabral to join them after the winger had repeatedly rejected Cape Verde, hoping to be called up by Portugal after being deemed by Ruben Amorim as the most important player in the club, as he helped Sporting reach their first league title in 14 years. Then there was Gilson Benchimol, a striker who, despite having attracted interest from AC Milan and Juventus back in his academy days, shockingly left it all behind to move to Russia, and would even become the first player to score a hat-trick for Cape Verde on his very first start. However, above all, it got both Steven Moreira and Logan Costa to switch their allegiance. Two former French youth internationals, the first, a right-back who was on his way to be named the MLS's Defender of the Year, and the second, a central defender who was about to take an €18 million move to Villarreal. In other words, the only player in their squad that was playing in the top 5 leagues and the most expensive Cape Verdean player of all time. But, nevertheless, he still wasn't my favorite player to join them that year. That was Leroy Duarte. What makes him special is that he only began playing football because his brother Larus had been scouted into Sparta Rotterdam's academy. But then, despite him actually turning out to be the biggest talent of the two, such was their bond that now, it's he who's pushing his brother to go harder. From the moment he got called up to those qualifiers, he insisted that I cannot imagine a world where I'd play in a tournament without my brother beside me. And man, not only did Leroy become a key player almost immediately, but as they made it to the AFCON, at the very last minute without having ever played a match for them, Larus got his first ever call-up as well. Yeah. After that, with 25 players born in 6 different countries and playing across 25 different clubs in 16 different leagues, they had reached their final form. So it was time to issue their first warning of just how good they had truly become. Drawn into a group alongside Ghana, Egypt and Mozambique, Cape Verde shocked everyone by coming out on top completely undefeated before taking down Mauritania in the round of 16. Yet, as they matched their best ever performance by reaching the quarterfinals, not only did they fail to score against South Africa despite taking 25 shots, but as they went to penalties, despite South Africa missing one and Vozinha saving another, their keeper Ronwen Williams saved not 2, not 3, but 4 penalties. And this time, the heartbreak was such that, with Stopira, another one of the team's veterans, having already stepped away, Vozinha decided it was time to retire too. But that was a massive mistake from both. In their absence, Cape Verde fell apart completely. It wasn't just that they didn't even make it out of the AFCON qualifiers, they finished last in their group with only 1 win in 6 games. And well, desperate times require desperate measures. So first things first, several of their players went and convinced 40-year-old Vozinha to come back from retirement. And then, of course, a couple more additions. Sidney Cabral, a Dutch-born player who in the space of 3 years had gone from playing in the German 5th tier to getting signed by Mourinho, as well as Telmo Arcanjo, who was about to take the Portuguese League Cup with Vitória de Guimarães after coming back from 14 months on the sidelines. And just like that, 6 games into World Cup qualification, Cape Verde were leading their group. However, here's the issue. With the tournament being expanded to 48 teams, only that first place would allow them to qualify directly and show FIFA they did not need their playoffs. But their next game was against second place Cameroon, the only team who had defeated them, and now Logan Costa, their most valuable player ever, had torn his ACL. Again, desperate times, desperate measures. So after Vozinha, they brought back 38-year-old Stopira as well, not to replace him. That task was handed off to Dine Borges. But because, as Vozinha always said, our strength comes from the way we treat each other like family. And what is family if not one generation guiding the next? So, on that day, about an hour in, it was 24-year-old Dylan Livramento, ironically Logan Costa's cousin, who grabbed the ball in midfield and made it past everyone to score maybe their most important goal ever. And, almost poetically, after seeing one of their goals wrongly disallowed in their next game, delaying their qualification to the very last match day, it was Stopira who scored the goal that sealed the deal. Cape Verde had made it, not because FIFA had expanded the World Cup, but because they had genuinely proven they were the best. However, as one fan among the celebrations told reporters that this is the biggest thing that ever happened in Cape Verde, he clearly had no idea what came next. Even if everyone else in the world doubted them, questioning how they could survive a World Cup when, out of the non-African teams in the tournament, Portugal and Iran were the only ones they had ever faced. Well, you saw what happened. With Vozinha in the form of his life and their defensive line breaking the World Cup's all-time record for the least fouls committed in a match, they opened things up by holding Spain to a draw before running it back against Uruguay, this time while playing some serious primetime attacking football and, now, undefeated and onto the knockout stage, about to face the world champions themselves. I don't think anyone is doubting them anymore.